On her show, Oprah Winfrey would often say that God is love, as if that was self-evident, as if everybody who believed in God simply accepted that as a given, as if all religions believed in this one fundamental truth. In fact, it's become an unquestioned truism in our culture that all religions do agree on this one basic thing, that God is love. According to the polls, a great majority of people believe in God. These polls usually come in at slightly over 80% people reporting that they believe in God. That would suggest that no matter what religion or denomination somebody belongs to or what spirituality they follow, the great majority of people simply presume that God is love. The only problem with this truism is that it simply isn't true. All religions don't agree on this one thing. Only Christianity actually teaches that God is love. No other religion does. While it gets more complicated than this, essentially the great religions of the East, Hinduism, Buddhism, and Taoism, teach that God is impersonal. From an Eastern philosophic perspective, God is much more like the Force be with you in the Star Wars movies. God can't be love if God is simply a force, an energy, a thing. Love only exists between persons, so only a personal God can be a God of love. However, the great religions of the West, outside of Christianity, that do believe in a personal God, Judaism and Islam, adamantly insist that God is one, that he's a solitary being. By nature, love is relational. It can only exist between persons. Therefore, a solitary being can't be love. Certainly, as these religions maintain, this God can be gracious, kind, merciful, and loving. But his very essence, his very nature can't be love. Before creating anything, this God had no one to love. So his eternal nature couldn't be love. Love of other couldn't be central to his being. And as I showed in a previous block, the love that a solitary being would have for us wouldn't truly be love. He would be creating us out of a need in himself to be loving. So creating us would be fulfilling a need in himself. It would be a dependency, and that isn't love, genuine love. The only kind of God that can be love, be a God of love, is the God that is only found in Christianity, that is found in the Trinity, a God of three persons loving each other throughout all eternity. That's the only way that love can be the eternal nature of God's very being, central to who God is. But how can one God be three persons? As multitudes throughout the centuries have objected, that's absurd. And I totally agree. The apparent absurdity of the Trinity was one of the major obstacles for me coming to accept Christianity. But as I came to see, in a logically heightened way, the doctrine of the Trinity actually makes the most sense of reality. And I'll show how in several future blogs. But for now, let me just point out this one thing. The incomprehensibility of the Trinity, the incomprehensible nature of trying to understand the Trinity that becomes such a roadblock, an obstacle to people believing in the Christian God, actually points to the fact that it's a genuine revelation and not a human invention in two ways. First, no one in the early church would ever think to invent such a highly problematic doctrine. If they were trying to convince the world that their God, the Christian God, was true, they wouldn't invent a doctrine that was so difficult to accept. And what that means is that those first disciples had to be compelled by their experience as good first century Jews who held as most sacred and true that God is one. They had to be compelled by their experience to accept, to believe that in Jesus they had encountered God in the flesh, which also meant that God was more than one. And at the heart of that experience that compelled them to believe that in Jesus God had become human, at the heart of that experience was the resurrection. So the absurdity of the Trinity actually reinforces the reality of that experience. It reinforces the reality that they had seen Jesus actually risen bodily from the dead. Second, if If the math worked, if understanding the doctrine of the Trinity was like understanding how 2 plus 2 equals 4, then we would rightly suspect that it's a human invention. Believing that God is a solitary being is something that human beings could easily invent. It makes sense to us. In the same way, believing that God is a force and energy is also something that humans could invent. That makes sense. But a genuine divine revelation, an authentic divine revelation of the transcendent nature of the infinite God would necessarily, by and large, be incomprehensible to us. It would always, at some level, remain a mystery. But here's the stunning thing. Like a lot of the other mysteries of Christian faith, though nobody could have guessed it, nobody could have guessed the doctrine of the Trinity, once revealed, it becomes obvious that this is the only way it could be. It's the only way that God could be love. So it betrays a higher rationality. It reveals a God infinitely greater than we'd ever imagine. I can't speak for Oprah, but I suspect that many of the people who say that God is love, what they really mean is that love is God, that love is the higher power that governs the universe, which of course is absurd. A higher power is an impersonal force which is completely incapable of love. If you believe God is love, then you believe in the Trinity. And if you do, the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit will pour out God's perfect, unconditional love into your heart. So do you think God is 3 persons, or do you find the whole thing completely absurd? Let me know what you think by going to the Contact EJ page of the Raising Jesus website. I'd love to hear from you. Also, please like our Facebook page, subscribe to our YouTube channel, and keep telling your friends about us. Thank you.